I'm going to ask you to role play a lot during the next 35 minutes. So I want you to now be U.S. Senator Garza. You are in the United States Congress.
Nice ring to it.
U.S. Senator Garza. You'd have to run for that office. It might seem less pleasant along the way, right? So you're U.S. Senator Garza. You now you encounter this legislation attempting to finally overhaul the immigration system in this country. What is your reaction to what you've read and seen so far?
Well, first, I think you take look. First, I think we have to appreciate what happened in Boston. Reminds us all of how vulnerable we are, and how indebted we are to a country that allows us these freedoms, and indebted we are to the extraordinary capabilities of first responders and the people that just jumped into it. You saw the picture of the cowboy jumping in and this sort of thing. But I think in terms of what's going on in Washington, you know, after Newton it was guns, after the elections it was immigration. We still have this sort of looming debt deficit discussion that we have to have as a country. So I think if I were counseling or advising somebody in the Senate, I would suggest they take a step back and realize what the impact of these sorts of issues and the failure to address them would be. And it's interesting because we recognize that Washington has become a very partisan place, and the issues that are out there right now are built around coalitions that are very fragile. As one person, I'm not going to tell you who it was, he says it's just them that like illegals don't like guns. Them that like guns don't like illegals. And those are the two issues that are out there.
But the immigration issue, Mr. Vester, seems to be more bipartisan than a lot of other issues.
It seems to be more bipartisan, but my point is how fragile the coalitions are. And I think what you have in terms of the proposals of the Gang of Eight, I think you have a very solid proposal, and I would be concerned that deviating from it too much would lead it down a path of failure. I think a lot of folks are going to have to take those kind of votes that are difficult, where they recognize that nobody got everything they wanted. And go down the road. So I think take a step back, start making the arguments about the economies and how important immigration reform is to the economic viability and vibrancy of our country.
In fact, you wrote an op-ed that ran in the Express News, I think on April 5th, arguing that from an economic health of the country standpoint, we've got to do immigration.
You know, one of the things I always say while I was at Post in Mexico, and I see a couple of people that I served with here, I think at times we made a mistake in talking about the immigration in terms of the benefit to other countries. That really what we have to talk about is immigration in terms of the benefits to the United States. I don't expect our leadership in Washington to do anything out of a sense of generosity, but I do expect them to do things out of a sense of self-interest in the best interest of our country. And if you look at the arguments about the economic arguments for immigration reform, you recognize that our economy exists and thrives and grows because of the immigrant, whether it's in the high-tech sector, in terms of the jobs created and the small businesses and the entrepreneurism and the patents filed. I mean, you go down the litany of things, whether it's in the lower skilled labor. The fact that if somebody's working in the lower skilled job that otherwise would not have been done, the spinoff from that creates 3.5 other jobs. And so I think step back, make the economic case for how it's in the best interest of the U.S. And then sort of cinch up and take a difficult vote.
What about the security issue? You know, we have at this moment from the right a number of Republican senators, including our 2 senators from Texas, are arguing that border security should really be our first priority, and that the bill that's being presented by the Gang of Eight may not sufficiently address that issue.
Well, let me say, I think border security is important to Americans generally. And what we have to focus on is border security that is actually effective. I, for example, have no ideological or theological reservations about a wall. I just don't think it works.
It's a practical problem.
It's a practical problem. And I say that from the perspective of somebody that has walked that river, that grew up in South Texas, that quite frankly, where I was born was probably 800 meters to the river. And so I've seen that. If you look at the vast majority of people that are in this country without documents arrived legally and simply overstayed their visas. And secondly, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about that, Kramer. Kramer sort of rolled his eyes, but that was our consul general in Mexico City while I was there. And in terms of the hard drugs, the cocaine and the methamphetamines, these sorts of things, again, the vast majority arrive through the otherwise legal crossings. Yeah. So I think what we have to focus on is more efficient enforcement and security at the legal crossings, more implementation of technology and the ability to scan and review what's happening at our legal crossings, and the ability to get a sense of who's coming into our country, where they're going, and whether or not they're overstaying the documents that allowed them to come into the country. So I think we have to be very careful about saying security and immediately thinking, quote, boots on the ground and walls along the river. If our focus is security, let's figure out how we can do it most effectively, not how we can do it in a way that simply sort of assuages some sort of visceral idea of what security means.
You buy the argument that Governor Perry and others in Texas have made that somehow President Obama and this administration have failed to adequately secure the border?
Well, you know what? Listen, I think that would be a hard argument in this sense.
A hard argument to prove that they had failed to secure the border.
Well, look, I don't know if the border is more secure by virtue of the fact that that we're doing anything in particular in Washington, but if you look at the movements of people across that border, that was something much larger than one administration. That was an economic situation that impacted the push-pull factors. Look,
the numbers would suggest illegal crossings are down, and deportations are up.
Essentially, the illegal crossings are nearly net zero, and the deportations are up. But if you look at that, there is an expanding middle class, growth in Mexico. People don't go strictly for ever so slightly a wage differential. It has to be significant to leave your country to come to the United States. So more people are actually staying home in Mexico. Yeah. And then if you look at the pull factors, over the course of the last handful of years, our economy has not been as strong or as robust or drawing people into any number of sectors.
Not as many jobs.
Not as many jobs. So was that the byproduct of one administration? No, that was a byproduct of, I think, of the economic realities. Ultimately, these are economic issues. People move for economic reasons.
Yeah. What about those who would say that whatever you address this bill up to be, in the end, it's going to be amnesty of some fashion? That's been the complaint about a lot of immigration reform legislation that has been attempted, not just present, but go back to 2006 when your old boss, President Bush, made a valiant attempt to get some kind of comprehensive immigration reform passed, was attacked from the right. Ultimately, that effort failed. You heard cries of amnesty then, you hear cries of amnesty now.
I think it reminds us of how of the power of words in the public arena, and the need to frame issues correctly. I think one of the things that we realized 6 years ago is if you were explaining, you were losing. And if you had to explain why it was an amnesty, you were probably losing the argument.
Isn't that what Senator Rubio is doing right now, having to explain why this is not amnesty?
Well, listen, I think if you look at what I understand the initial outlines of the bill to be, a $2,000 or $3,000 payment, a 10-year track to the ability to apply, and then a 3-year wait. You're looking at a 13-year window. It's hard to call that amnesty.
Worst amnesty ever, right? This is like significantly bad. I mean, if you want to get here illegally and be here illegally, it takes a long time to convert.
Let's say you're saying, well, it's that somebody has come here illegally, and we are going to quote punish them for that act. Yeah. In a criminal setting, let's say, now walk yourself into a criminal court in the state of Texas. What level of offense would it take to get essentially a 10-year deferred adjudication, after which you had 3 more years that you remained on probation? It's got to be a pretty serious offense.
Right.
And so if you look at that, you'd say, and that's amnesty for a pretty serious offense?
That's not terribly forgiving.
That's not terribly forgiving. It says you have a significant hurdle to overcome in terms of the way you have lived your life in this country. You're going to pay a fine, you're going to have a 10-year track and a 3-year window, and then the opportunity to apply for citizenship. I've got to agree with the senator. It's hard to call that amnesty.
Are you going to find, Senator Garza, enough of your colleagues, since we're still role-playing here, enough of your colleagues to support this bill, you think, in the end, understanding that the bar now has been moved, or the goalposts have been moved from 50 to 60 on almost every issue? are you going to find 60 U.S. senators who, in the end, will support this legislation?
I think so. I think there are some sort of the macro factors that influence the environment within which those votes are being cast. One is, I think better economic arguments have been made this time around. I think better coalitions have been built in terms of business and labor. I think there's more of a recognition that the movements of people north from other countries are such that they're more manageable now. I think there's a general sense on the security that we're doing a little bit better job, and just the demographics of our country suggest that if you don't get with it, you're going to get left behind. And so I think those sort of factors all suggest on the Senate side you're going to be all right. What's interesting, 6 years ago, I actually talked to then President Bush a week out from the vote in the Senate, and then a few days after that. He says, Tony, the problem was we were picking them up in, as he put it, onesies and twosies, and then when they started to run, they were running in threesies and foursies.
Yeah.
And so I think 60 is a significant bar. What happens in the House is anybody's guess.
Right.
But I think it should be good.
Not going to get there though unless it gets out of the Senate.